Happy to be here this morning in this very impressive campus to preside over the first of the 4 lectures to be given by my old friend, Professor T.N. Srinivasan. Professor T.N. Srinivasan needs no introduction to students of economics in India. He is one of the most distinguished economists, not only from India but in the world. And his interests cover a wide diversity of subjects in the field of economic practice. Now, and his work, he has written extensively, and his work is marked by analytical rigor and a very persuasive style of writing. He has been, Professor Reddy mentioned about his work with Professor Bhagwati. He has been relentless in the 60s and 70s in his criticism of the type of command economy which we had, which stifled economic growth and made us perhaps one of the most regimented economies outside the communist bloc. And the reforms initiated, as Professor Reddy just mentioned, in 91, owe a lot of their intellectual ancestry of the reforms could in a way be traced to the writings of people like Professor Srinivasan. It's a great pleasure for me to be here to preside over this lecture. And the subject Professor Srinivasan has chosen is growth, sustainability, and Indian economic reform. With your permission, Professor Reddy, I'd like to say a few words on each of these 3 aspects. As you mentioned, Professor Reddy, we had reached a 9% growth rate between 2003 and 2008, but as a result of the international economic and financial turmoil, we were not impacted very strongly, but to the extent that it led to a slowdown in our growth rate to 6.8 in 2 years ago and 7.4 last year. We hope to be back to between 8.5% and 9% this year and get on to 9% from next year onwards. In fact, I believe we now have the basis for at least a 9% growth rate in the economy over the next few years. The arithmetic of our investment ratio and the capital output ratio points to this result. We are now saving around 33-35% of GDP, and with 2-3% foreign savings representing the current account deficit, we have an investment ratio of around 38%. And our observed capital output ratio in the last few years was about 4, which should give us around 9% plus. So in a way, the arithmetic or the structural basis for a 9% growth is there. We are, as someone put it, on the growth turnpike, the 9% growth turnpike. And this has certain implications also for the future. If at all, the movement in India growth is likely to be higher towards 10%. Recently, the Prime Minister has been saying that he expects double-digit growth in 2 to 3 years' time. It's interesting that as we move into double-digit growth, China is slipping from double-digit growth into single-digit growth. This year, for the first time in many years, Chinese growth is likely to be less than 10%, between 8 and 9%. And the forecast is that in the coming years, it will be 8% or even below 8%. So it's a coincidence that as we move up to double digits, China has moved down to single digits, which could mean that we could become, if one were an optimist to say, the fastest growing economy in the world. And what gives us some basis of strength compared to China is that our economy's growth rate is basically consumption driven, whereas China is even now very largely investment driven. But so on the growth front, one can take an optimistic view. But as the second part of Professor Srinivasan's lecture, sustainability. Now, for growth to be meaningful, it has to be sustainable. And this have got both internal and external factors. To my mind, the most important internal factor which will determine the sustainability of growth is the way we manage our public finances. We have been running large fiscal deficits for the last few years. I always like to say the fiscal deficit in India is like the elephant in the room. We have to, so far, had to live with it. But over a period of time, there is no escaping the need for fiscal consolidation. We have the framework for it in the fiscal responsibility and budget management legislation. But last 2 years, for various reasons, including the fact that we had to give some stimulus packages at a time when the economy was slowing down, the budget has gone into even larger deficit, and last year the deficit was 6.8% of GDP, way above the forecast and way above the FRBM time frame. This year, the budget was forecast to have 5.5% fiscal deficit, but thanks to the bonanza of receipts under the 3G spectrum auction, it's likely that we might contain the deficit to less than 5%, which gives us a good platform for the next period. Though there are still, certain dangers. A high fiscal deficit increases borrowing from the Reserve Bank and leads to higher level of monetary expansion than the GDP growth can sustain, with its inevitable consequence of pressure on prices. And a high fiscal deficit also means enlarged market borrowings, higher interest rates, and crowding out of the private sector's investment requirements.
This concludes the first lecture. I am extremely grateful to Professor Mr. Narasimham for visiting our campus and for giving a comprehensive view on economic reforms, sustainability, as well as the financial sector reforms. I thank all of you for your patience. I wish to present a memento to Mr. Narasimham.